MkLeo is known in the Smash world for many things. He's the best Joker player in the world, he's the GOAT, and fittingly enough, he's stolen the hearts of audiences all across the world. But there's something else MkLeo is known for in the Smash community, being a multi-character specialist. Of course, Joker will always be MkLeo's most famous choice, but he's gone through quite the rotation of characters during his time competing in Smash Ultimate. How many exactly? Well, today we'll be taking an in-depth look at that exact question to find every character MkLeo has ever used. First things first, let's define some rules for this video. We'll be going through this mostly chronologically, but not necessarily going day by day, instead breaking this up into eras. It'll be MkLeo's very own eras tour, if you will. Don't sweat the details. Secondly, I'm only going to be covering characters used in tournaments. MkLeo has played every character in the game, obviously, from streams to friendlies to just getting them off of random. But today, we're focused on characters that Leo has used in a competitive bracket setting, but we will be including all brackets, whether they count for the rankings or not. And lastly, I will acknowledge that the data I'm using for this video isn't 100% complete. If a set that Leo played in didn't have its characters reported, then I have no way of knowing about it. So there are likely gaps in the timeline where character data simply wasn't done. Also, I mostly relied on Smash data for my research in this video, which stopped tracking tournaments about 2 months ago. However, for a video like this, where we're looking mostly in the past and Leo hasn't been breaking out new characters in the last 2 months, this dataset should serve our purposes perfectly. With those ground rules established, let's finally get into it. When Smash Ultimate first came out, many players first tested their old mains from Smash 4 to see how good they still were. MkLeo was no different, and in Smash 4, Leo was primarily known for 2 characters, Marth and Cloud, and thus, we can see some results from these characters in the game's early days. The least used of these 2 characters was Cloud, who saw a singular use early on at Glitch 6, where Leo used the character in Winner's Semis against Light when down 0-2. If you ask why, I'd theorize that it has something to do with the matchup, as at other tournaments where Leo used primarily Ike but had to fight Light, he'd swap onto Lucina, like we can see at Genesis 6. Regardless, this attempted counterpick at Glitch 6 didn't end up working in MkLeo's favor, and Cloud was quickly abandoned. After all, at the start of Ultimate, Cloud was severely nerfed from his Smash 4 appearance. It would take many years and many buffs before Cloud became the character we see players like Spargo piloting today. Leo did use Cloud more often over the online era though, a time in Leo's career where his character choices felt like a Mario Kart item box. And it was these online appearances that boosted Cloud to being one of Leo's top 5 most played characters. If you look at this data though, it says that Leo used Cloud at the recent Mexican tournament Bonito Harbor. But when we go and look for ourselves, we can see that it was just a misreport on StartGG, with whoever reported this set accidentally swapping Leo and Spargo's characters. And in reality, Leo did not go Cloud at this tournament and hasn't used him offline period since Glitch 6. The other one of Leo's 2 Smash 4 mains was Marth, who has a lot more to tell. Leo actually used Marth a little bit in 2019, though mostly just as a more fun version of Lucina, who we'll cover later on. Most notably, MkLeo used Marth a lot at UFA 2019, a European major, though he was forced to swap off Marth eventually once he reached more difficult opponents. The other major Leo used Marth at in 2019 was Smash Ultimate Summit 2, which actually saw Leo's character usage be split nearly down the middle between Marth and Joker. In round-robin pools, Leo used Marth in 2 sets, one against Armada's Inkling, which Leo won 3-1, and once against Esam where he got reverse 3-0'd. Notice anything about these 2 matchups specifically? Yeah, they're both listed as some of Joker's worst matchups on MkLeo's own matchup charts, or at least his charts from back then. It seems that even back in 2019, MkLeo was counterpicking to cover Joker's poor matchups. Either way, Leo moved into main bracket and didn't use Marth again until Winner's Semis, where he tried it against Peach, another matchup he previously listed as bad for Joker. It took a game, but not the set, and Leo dropped into losers. The next time he used Marth was against Meister in losers semis, and even though it took 2 games, Meister almost reverse 3-0'd Leo here, until he swapped to Joker in game 5 to take the set. Lastly, MkLeo tried Marth one last time in losers finals, pulling him out in a single game that he didn't win. And thus, Marth wasn't brought out for the rest of the tournament, which Leo did go on to win, by the way. After this, Leo used primarily Marth in online tournaments only, with decent results but never winning an online tournament with solo Marth. However, everything changed in 2022, where Leo brought out Marth to use again at 2 offline locals and then a Mexican regional, winning all 3 times. But what changed? Once again, the same old song and dance, matchups. But this time, MkLeo was suffering in 2 matchups in particular, Kazuya and Mario. Marth did decently well against both characters, or at least to Leo better than Joker, with Leo defeating top Mexican Mario main Superdog at the regional I mentioned earlier with Marth. But the Marth's biggest peak would come at the Scuffed World Tour. I'm sure I don't need to remind you about this set, but after having gone down 0-2 against Riddles' Kazuya, MkLeo pulled out Marth and proceeded to reverse 3-0 Riddles to win the set, a match that will go down in Smash Ultimate history. At this point, Leo might have believed that he had finally found the counterpick he had been looking for. But unfortunately, when he and Riddles met again at Rise and Grind 2023 and Leo used Marth again, it wasn't enough, and Leo lost Game 5. With this defeat, Leo decided to search elsewhere for his desired counterpick, dropping Marth entirely and not using him again to this day. With that, we've gone over MkLeo's 2 Smash 4 mains, his early days of attempting to use them, and the ultimate realization that they weren't the characters for him. So, knowing he couldn't use one of his old characters, MkLeo started to look for new ones. Which brings us to a trio of characters that MkLeo used in Smash Ultimate from release all the way until Joker came out. Wolf, Ike, and Lucina. Let's go over them from least used to most used, beginning with Wolf. If you're not obsessed with the competitive scene like me, you may not have known that Leo even had a wolf. But saying that Leo had a wolf isn't exactly accurate. It would be more accurate to say that MkLeo experimented with Wolf in the game's early stages, because, well, everyone had a wolf in those days. Wolf in 2019 was basically ageist now. Feels like everyone's got one in their pocket because they were the extremely simple, extremely good top tier. Leo tried Wolf once at Frostbite 2019 in one game that he went on to lose. Leo tried Wolf in one set at the first Smash Ultimate Summit, which Leo won. And lastly, Leo went primarily Wolf at 2GG Prime Saga, winning a few sets and going Game 5 with Light in top 8, but eventually losing to place 7th. Leo also went primarily Wolf at Pound 2019, getting a few solid wins, but yet again placing 7th in a bit of an underperformance. Pair this with Prime Saga, and we can see why Leo decided to drift away from this character. Next up is Lucina, which in the early days before Joker was released, was MkLeo's true secondary, used primarily to cover the bad matchups of his main at the time, Ike. The first time this counterpick made its debut was at Genesis 6, which is likely the tournament you think of when you imagine Leo playing Lucina, since she was the character Leo used in Grands vs Void. However, Void, alongside Light, which we mentioned earlier in the video, are the only 2 people Leo used Lucina against at this tournament. Again, likely because MkLeo saw Pichu and Fox as bad matchups for Ike at the time. Lucina also assisted Leo at Frostbite 2019, both in Losers Finals against Myron, where Leo succeeded, and in Grands against Tweak, where Leo didn't. The first Smash Summit actually saw Leo use primarily Lucina, as once out of pools, Leo only dropped 2 games in an absolutely dominant tear to win the entire tournament, including wins on Gluttony in Winners Finals and Dabuz in Grands. This was the one tournament where Leo used primarily Lucina and ended up winning. At Get On My Level 2019, Leo was using Joker, but continued to use Lucina as a secondary counterpick, using her to defeat Void's Pichu and then attempting to counterpick Esam with her, though that one was to no avail. At the first ever main stage, Leo again counterpicked Void's Pichu with Lucina, forcing him to swap off to Sheik, at which point Leo himself swapped back to Joker. At VCA 2019, Leo counterpicked Quick Samus with Lucina, using her to win the set. And lastly, at 2GG Kickoff Congo Saga, a pre-local, MkLeo used Lucina to defeat Riddles' Terry. This was the last time Leo used Lucina in pre-Lockdown Ultimate, as 2020 came and Leo continued to use Lucina online, though much more sparingly. And that would probably be where the Lucina segment ended, if not for one tiny rat: Pichu. You see, if you noticed anything in this segment, it's probably that MkLeo used Lucina to counterpick Joker's bad matchups, but specifically Void's Pichu. And at Ultimate Fighting Arena 2023, MkLeo ran into the French Pichu main Neytoru. Leo had previously defeated Neytoru at tournaments like Ultimate Summit 6 using characters like Metanite, which we'll go over later. But here, MkLeo decided to rely on his old counterpick from 2019 to win him this set. Except he didn't win. Neytoru actually won this set 3-1, casting Leo down into losers dramatically early, which would end up kicking off a great losers run that would eventually end at 4th place. But for our purposes today, this set marks the final time that MkLeo used Lucina in a tournament setting. Now here's our last pre-Joker character for MkLeo, his first ever main, Ike. MkLeo first used Ike at Smash Conference United, which was Leo's first ever Smash Ultimate tournament in this data, taking place on January 5th of 2019, not even a month after the game released. Leo would win this tournament, cementing Ike's place at the top of Leo's repertoire. However, interestingly enough, after this win, Leo would only use Ike at 4 more offline Smash tournaments. The first of these was Glitch 6, which was actually a bit of an underperformance compared to the tournaments around it, with MkLeo only getting 4th place. I know, right? Only 4th. Anyways, after breezing through the vast majority of this bracket, Leo would be stopped dead in his tracks by Light's Fox in winner's semis. As we mentioned earlier in the video, this was the set where MkLeo tried out Cloud as a counterpick, though sadly it didn't work out. MkLeo would eventually fall in loser semi-finals to place 4th. The next of these tournaments was Genesis 6, which was the big one. Leo had finally settled on Lucina as his counterpick secondary. Though what some may not remember from this run if you've only seen grand finals is that this run was primarily Ike, as Leo only used Lucina for the apparent bad matchups of Fox and Pichu. Against every other opponent, Leo used his trusty Ike. And needless to say, this is the highest peak the character's ever gotten. This is one of Leo's most iconic runs. What else is there to say? The final major that MkLeo used Ike at was Frostbite 2019, and as we covered earlier, MkLeo actually used Lucina in both losers finals and grand finals, eventually placing 2nd. But this tournament would prove to be the last hurrah of Ike for MkLeo, who was beginning to shift towards solo Lucina, as the only other time Leo used Ike offline was the first Smash Ultimate Summit. As we covered earlier, this tournament was a bit of a transition for Leo, who was beginning to shift towards solo Lucina, winning this tournament primarily with her. If it weren't for Joker coming out soon after this, who knows? Leo might still play Lucina. Either way, Leo tried Ike only once at this tournament in pools in a set that he didn't win, but would later win the run back in main bracket with Lucina. And thus, MkLeo dropped Ike forever, only using him in rare online tournaments and never again bringing him out offline. Of course, with the nerfs the character received, who could blame him? Some pessimists are even putting Ike in the bottom 5 on tier lists these days. Truly, a fall from grace for the ages. If things had stayed like this in this meta, then perhaps we'd be talking today about MkLeo, the greatest Lucina main to ever live. But that's not how things turned out, because soon, on April 17th, 2019, Joker would be released, and the world of Smash Bros would never be the same. So weirdly enough, despite the fact that Joker is MkLeo's most used and most iconic character, he's also the character I have the least to say about. Because what can I say about MkLeo's Joker that hasn't been said 100 times already? MkLeo first started playing Joker in Japan, actually, his first appearance being at the first EGS Cup, placing 2nd with a good win over Abadango on the way. But the first North American tournament Leo used Joker in was Get On My Level 2019, using him to win a few sets in loser side top 8 before losing to ESAM, a set where Leo used solo Lucina instead of Joker. But after this 4th place finish, it was off to the races for MkLeo. From this point onward, MkLeo made it to grand finals and usually won every single major tournament he attended, going pretty much solo Joker. This streak of wins includes MomoCon 2019, Smash and Splash 5, CEO 2019, Smash Factor 8, EVO 2019, which was the largest Smash tournament of all time, Super Smash Con 2019, Shine 2019, Uprising 2019, Main Stage, Ultimate Fighting Arena 2019, Smash Ultimate Summit 2, Vienna Challengers Arena 2019, 2GG Congo Saga and its pre-local, Genesis 7, and lastly, Leo's greatest losers run of all time, Frostbite 2020. There is a reason why 2019 Leo is the image of dominance in a fighting game. This streak of Grand Finals placements was the golden age of Smash Bros. Ultimate. And perhaps it's fitting that this section ends with us talking about Frostbite 2020. You see, in Grands, one of the most brutal 6-0s of all time went down in MkLeo versus Meister. For the first 5 games, Leo went solo Joker, but in that 6th and final game, MkLeo took out someone else. Someone who had just come out. Someone by the name of Byleth. And thus, a new era was marked for MkLeo, the Byleth era. But before we get to that, we actually have a different era to cover first. I know, it's crazy, but just treat this Byleth game as foreshadowing for now, and follow me as I lead you into a dark time, the lockdown era. You see, MkLeo was not nearly as dominant during the pandemic lockdowns as he was in 2019. This is for a number of reasons, but one of them was the fact that Joker is not a very good character online. In fact, after Frostbite 2020, one of Leo's most iconic runs ever, we wouldn't see the Joker again for a very long time. But this isn't like Ike, where Leo eventually dropped him entirely. Instead, the Joker lurked beneath the surface for many years, eventually resurfacing as Leo returned to maining him in January of 2023. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We've got to go over Leo's online era, and while MkLeo didn't have as many gold medals, he made up for it in character diversity. For real, this time in Leo's career felt like he chose characters by throwing a dart at a massive wheel. So allow me to announce that this era will be our lightning round. I'm about to breeze through like 25 different characters right now. Most of them were used strictly online for only a handful of appearances, but others will actually be characters that Leo tried to use offline, but only once or twice. You ready? All right, then without further ado, begin the lightning round. 2 tournaments are responsible for a good majority of these one-off character picks, those tournaments being Ultimate at Xanadu 392 and Mega Smash Mondays Online 41, both of which took place at near the same time. At Xanadu, MkLeo used characters such as Captain Falcon, Diddy Kong, Toon Link, Dr. Mario, Falco, and Robin. Funnily enough, Falco and Robin were also used at Mega Smash Mondays, alongside other one-offs such as Bayonetta, Banjo, Plant, Pikachu, Young Link, Villager, Terry, and Ganondorf. For these characters, they were only used at these 2 tournaments, and while I'm unsure why MkLeo was going so many different characters, there's a good chance he did it for content or just out of boredom. Let's go over some other notable one-off characters. Firstly, at the Smash World Tour Mexico Ultimate Online Qualifier, MkLeo went King DDD in Grand Finals against Spargo, though as you may have predicted, this didn't quite help Leo win the set. But I hear the reason why Leo did this was because it was a sub-goal. There are few recorded instances of MkLeo using both Hero and Snake at locals, but these sets aren't recorded on Smash data, so I have no way of knowing if he used either of these characters much after this. MkLeo entered in a Steve-only Wi-Fi tournament in 2020, the only tournament recorded where Leo used the Blocky Menace. He'd eventually be eliminated by Atada. At Smash Conference United back in 2019, MkLeo used Richter in one set versus 8-Bit Man, but ended up going down 0-2 and swapped to Ike to reverse 3-0. This is the only time Leo used Richter in singles, but it's worth noting that Leo used the character in Squad Strike brackets often back in 2019. MkLeo used Wario once online in 2020. And even though the data says that Leo used Wario against Gluttony at the pre-local 2GG Kickoff Congo Saga, as far as I can tell, that's a misreport. You know who Leo did use at this tournament though? Mewtwo. Against Riddles, Leo tried Mewtwo, lost game 1, then swapped off to Lucina. But in Winners Finals against Tweak, Leo actually went solo Mewtwo and defeated Tweak's Diddy Kong 3-1. And while this is very impressive, do keep in mind that at this point in Smash history, Tweak's Diddy Kong in Ultimate was just a pocket character, not his main like it is today. And Diddy Kong was still a nerfed version of what he would eventually become. Leo used Mewtwo a few times online, and interestingly enough, actually lost to Hungrybox while doing so. So yeah, technically speaking, Hungrybox has a Leo win. I'm just gonna let you do what you will with that information. Sheik was used one time by MkLeo, and unlike every other character in this lightning round, it was actually fairly recently, and strictly offline. At a local, MkLeo used Sheik against Micromanage, a Min player. And if you didn't know, this matchup is considered one of, if not flat out, Min's worst matchup. Leo also used Sheik the round after, against Joker main Nitro, presumably just to keep practicing her. Now the reason for this is actually quite simple. Coming off of his recent losses to Min players like Dabuz and Proto Banham, Leo was looking for a counterpick to Min and tried out her worst matchup, Sheik. However, apparently Leo decided not to use her, and would eventually find another Min counterpick in a certain robotic operating buddy, but we'll get to that in due time. Next up is Sephiroth, who MkLeo played mostly at the Sephiroth Invitational, a Sephiroth-only event to showcase the character right after he released. Leo ended up placing second at this event, and after this only used Sephiroth a few times in sparse online tournaments. Next up is Random. Like random, like literally picking the question mark. Leo has only done this at all random events, usually ran by Meister. At one of these in particular, the Meister RNG Invitational, Leo managed to beat Mr. E, Kurama, and Leviathan, formerly Naito Sharp, but Leo ended up losing to Aaron. MkLeo has gone Samus a few times online, and interestingly enough has tried to counterpick Sonics with Samus on more than one occasion. Despite even once taking it to Game 5, this counterpick has sadly never worked. Leo has gone Kazuya 3 times, though unusually it's all been offline, all 3 times during locals and all 3 times against MK Big Boss, with Leo winning all 3 times. Does this qualify as bullying? MkLeo has used Chrom a few times, both online and offline. Offline, Leo used Chrom against Gact at Uprising 2019 in Grand Finals. You may have actually seen it in the background during the Joker segment. However, his 2 sets with Gact are the only time Leo went Chrom at this tournament. Now we're down to our last few characters, the ones that actually saw quite a lot of play during the online era. The first one of these is Link, a character Leo actually played a lot of back in 2019, but only in squad strike brackets. In the online era, MkLeo ran a few online brackets with solo Link, namely Captain Quarters 1 and Flat Realm 45, getting good wins in the process like Shiny Mark and Skittles twice. And lastly, for this lightning round, we have Greninja, who was actually Leo's 4th most played character in the Smash Data records, right behind his main trio of Joker, Byleth, and Aegis. Alongside Byleth, Greninja was one of Leo's go-to online characters, but unlike Byleth, Greninja didn't see notable offline usage once in-person competition returned. Some of MkLeo's best online performances came from this Greninja, and if you ask me, I think it's a shame it hasn't seen more offline play, especially since it would do really good against Min. And that wraps up our lightning round. It's now time for us to move on into the next era of MkLeo's play, the post-lockdown era. And there's nowhere else for us to begin than with Leo's 2nd most played character, Byleth. We saw inklings of Leo's Byleth way back at Frostbite 2020, but when online tournaments were in full swing, this character was Leo's primary go-to, alongside Greninja of course. This character saw Leo through the Wi-Fi era when Joker wasn't able to. And when in-person competition returned in 2021, Leo didn't even bother swapping back to Joker. But in some ways, nothing had changed since those old days, with Leo continuing to have a level of dominance that left the other competitors trying their best to keep up. All the way from Smash Summit 3 to the Ludwig Smash Invitational, Leo made it to Grands the vast majority of the time, though he did have a few underperformances at Summit 4, Collision 2022, SmashCon 2022, and Summit 5, with that tournament seeing Leo miss out on top 8 at a North American major for the first time in Smash Ultimate history. And if it weren't for the outlier of Leo's 33rd at Umebura Japan Major 2019, I wouldn't have had to put North American in that last sentence. But regardless, Leo did keep up a massive streak at majors all things considered, which included tournaments like Smash Summit 3, Riptide 2021, Glitch 8.5, Lowtide City 2021, Port Party 6, Mainstage 2021, the Smash World Tour Championships, Summit 4, Collision 2022, Delfino Mazza Rita 2022, Genesis 8, Pound 2022, E-Carabina, Double Down 2022, Super Smash Con 2022, Summit 5, and lastly, the Ludwig Smash Invitational. Now, as you may have noticed throughout that reading, not all of those tournaments were solo Byleth, like we saw in the Joker era. Don't worry, we'll get to it. But for all intents and purposes, aside from a few outliers that we will cover, these majors were played using primarily Byleth. We didn't really even see Joker except for matchups where Leo felt like he needed it. For example, Dabuzz's Min and ESAM's Pikachu, both of whom have a very dominant matchup into Byleth, particularly Min, a nemesis for Leo. But it's quite fitting that the Ludwig Smash Invitational was the end of this era, because Leo used pretty much solo Byleth to sweep basically everyone, only dropping one game the entire time and only swapping off Byleth to fight Tabuzz's Min Min. This was the high note that Byleth ended on, as the very next major, Genesis 9, saw MkLeo use mostly Joker. And from there, very suddenly, Byleth took a major backseat to Joker and eventually was faded out of MkLeo's rotation altogether. You'll still see Byleth every now and again, but mostly as a desperation counterpick in the face of a matchup that Leo really doesn't want to play with Joker, like in its most recent appearance against Snow's Mario at Kagurabi 12, which Leo lost. But this era didn't just see Byleth, like we saw with the Joker era of 2019. Instead, MkLeo was constantly experimenting with new counterpicks and new characters. Before we get to modern MkLeo and what his character lineup looks like today, we'll go over each and every one of these experiments. Chronologically, the first of these experiments was the character that would eventually become Leo's third most played character, Pyramithra, aka Aegis. The first big tournament that MkLeo used Aegis in was Summit 3, where Leo used primarily Aegis, especially within top 8, but came up just short of winning. From here, the Aegis never really took a key role in Leo's lineup, but it became a very consistent secondary to pull out whenever he needed it, having appearances at tons of tournaments. Their most important performances being at the Smash World Tour Championships, Leo's Losers Run at Super Smash Con 2022, having their best performance as Leo's only character at Rise and Grind 2022, winning Leo a major on their own, and Leo also used Aegis a lot at Summit 5, as well as Major Upset, garnering a Spargo win in the process. These aren't the only tournaments Leo used Aegis in, but these are the ones where Aegis had a considerable impact and were an important factor. These days, Leo still uses Aegis, but mostly as a counterpick character against problem matchups for Joker, like Pikachu and Sonic. And although this setup isn't perfect, Aegis still remains a low maintenance top tier for Leo to pull out anytime he feels like he needs to. The next of these experiments was Corrin, and even though we remember Corrin as an important character for MkLeo, she was actually in use for a shockingly short time. MkLeo used Corrin at a few online events and locals, and notably was very verbal about his belief in the character over on his YouTube channel, even proclaiming that he was going to marry her. Do what you will with that information, I suppose. But either way, the first time Leo's Corrin really came into the public eye was Delfino Mazzarita 2022. At this tournament, in round-robin pools, Leo was going solo Byleth, except for a single game in his set with Vanilla, where Leo swapped to Corrin for game 3. Kinda odd, but maybe he's just flexing? Wrong, because after this, once in main bracket, MkLeo would only swap off of Corrin in one set, winner semis against Chag. Other than that, MkLeo used Corrin to defeat Larry Lurr, Gluttony, and Spargo to win the tournament. Ironically enough, it may have been this performance that inspired Spargo to use Corrin more, even though these days he uses her way more than Leo ever did. Either way, after this, Corrin had a few appearances at majors, but usually just for 1 or 2 sets, never for a full run. This ended at 95 King of Fields 2, where Leo went solo Corrin until he won the tournament. But after that, it was back to rare appearances, with Leo even losing to Proto Banham with Corrin at Double Down. And then came Leo's Corrin's final appearance at Wave Dash 2023. This tournament was really a mixed bag for MkLeo, who went 4 different characters. Why? Well, because of Sonic's. You see, Leo was fine for the most part, just going by Joker and Byleth, but both of those characters hard lose to Sonic. So when the two players had to face off, Leo was a bit lost. His Byleth wasn't working, and even a Desperation Metanite had failed. Leo ended up consulting his then coach, Last, to ask, if I need to counterpick Sonic, and I'm just not feeling Aegis today, who do I go? To which Last then responded, how's your Corrin feeling? At this point, Leo not only clutched up winners finals against Sonics, but then went on to win the tournament in the Grand Reset 3-1. And it seems as though Leo is a big fan of taking his characters out on a high note, because this was the last time to this day that Leo has ever gone Corrin in a tournament setting, online or offline. Our next character is someone we've actually hinted at already. You see, remember when I mentioned that MkLeo's Corrin lost to Proto Banham in winners finals of Double Down 2022? Well, Leo made it back into grand finals at that tournament, and after searching far and wide for a counterpick for his nemesis Min Min, it seems as though Leo has finally found a good answer. MkLeo whipped out Rob after only having used him before at 2 other tournaments. Without even any Wi-Fi tourneys, this is quite literally an instance of Leo pulling a character out of nowhere on the biggest stage with the highest stakes. This grand set with Proto was a back and forth nail biter, but sadly, Leo couldn't quite clutch it out. This may have discouraged MkLeo from trying out Rob again, as we didn't see him for quite some time. Leo used it online against Time Gear's Min Min, and then used it at Sunrise 2023 against Mezcal's Ridley, which if you didn't know is a very bad matchup, with Mezcal himself considering it to be Ridley's worst. The next time we'd see Rob on the big stage was at Watch the Throne, when MkLeo pulled out Rob in top 8 against Ken's Sonic, and very nearly took the set too. At this point, Leo said that he was going to try and work on the Rob again, at which point he went to a Mexican regional and absolutely swept it with solo Rob. However, at this point, Leo's Rob usage went down drastically for no obvious reason. The last time Leo used Rob offline was at Bonito Harbor in a single set against Gyeohyu. As far as I can tell, there's really no reason for Leo to stop using Rob other than him trying to focus on a new experiment in the form of Roy. But we'll get to that in a minute, because there's one other character we need to cover first. In this era of post-lockdown MkLeo, this segment is probably going to be the shortest one. It's time to talk about Metanite. MkLeo used Metanite at a few online tournaments, and actually, Metanite was something of a secondary for MkLeo back in Smash 4. But regardless, his usage here was much lower. That was until Smash Summit 6. Before this tournament, MkLeo hyped up a new character that he would be showing off, saying that it fits his playstyle and would help him overcome Joker's bad matchups. And this makes sense when you think about it. Even though Sonic and Pikachu optimists will say that this matchup is even because they believe their character barely loses any matchups, opinions among more common players say that Metanite goes even with Sonic and both rats, maybe even beating the rats. Oh, and as an added bonus, Metanite is considered to be one of Min Min's worst matchups. At Smash Summit 6, there was a particular rat player in attendance for MkLeo to test this theory out on. The only 2 times MkLeo used Metanite at Smash Summit 6 was in one game against Aaron and in one full set against Neytoru, the French Pichu. Apparently, Neytoru had been doing really well against Leo's other characters and friendlies, though I can't confirm that myself. Either way, in this set, Leo defeated Neytoru in a dominant 3-0. And while the stars seem to be aligning, that's actually where this segment basically ends. I mean, after this, Leo swept a local with Metanite, but past that? Well, he tried it against Time Gear's Min Min in Coinbox and lost. He tried it against Jackal at Crown III and lost. And he tried it against Sonics at Wave Dash 2023, a set he only won because he swapped off Metanite and onto Corrin. And so, that brings us to our final character for today's video. The most recent addition to MkLeo's character rotation, Roy. MkLeo had only used Roy once at a Wi-Fi tournament prior to his debut on the big stage at Diamond Dust, a tournament that barely wasn't a major by the slimmest of margins. This run definitely had mixed results. Leo got good wins against Candle and Cosmos, and his losses to Shiny Mark and Riddles are, some would say, Roy's 2 worst matchups. So definitely not bad losses by any means. But a 7th place finish isn't exactly stellar, especially at a non-major tournament. After this run, MkLeo's Roy wouldn't win a single offline set. MkLeo tried to use Roy against Light at the Luminosity Smash Invitational, but lost 2-0. And when Leo went to Japan for Delta 8 and Kagari B12, he attempted to use Roy 3 times. At Delta 8, it came out against Akakikusu's Hero. Not a bad counterpick by any means, but still, it didn't clutch out the set, and MkLeo was eliminated at 9th. And at Kagari B12, MkLeo tried to use Roy against Snow's Mario, which didn't work, and Yaman Action's Steve, which really didn't work. But not all hope is lost. Leo is still training this Roy behind the scenes, as seen at a recent Coinbox where MkLeo used it to win several sets and go to a decisive Game 3 against Shiny Mark. Though I have to be honest, I do have my concerns about this matchup spread, as Roy doesn't really cover that many matchups for Joker. And that, dear viewers, is every character MkLeo has ever used. But where exactly does that leave us? As we move from the post-lockdown era into the modern era, What does MkLeo's character pool really look like in 2024? Well, the MkLeo of today is mostly a solo Joker main. It's clear that Leo is trying to work through problem matchups instead of just avoiding them by swapping characters, and in so doing, perhaps return to his level of 2019 dominance, or at the very least, break into the top 10 again. Recent majors like King Con saw Leo use nearly all Joker to take home his first major victory of the year. Collision 2024 saw Leo make top 8 with all Joker, and as much as we talked about Leo's Japan trip, his runs at Delta 8 and Kagaribi 12 were mostly Joker, with most character experimentation just being in the sets that he lost. Get on My Level X saw MkLeo make top 8 and even take Sonics to a game 5 with Joker, a matchup he used to avoid anytime it was possible to. However, Leo does still occasionally use the secondary. Most commonly, this will be Aegis, whose status as a low maintenance top tier that can cover Joker's bad matchups well enough means that she's a reliable standby. Recently, uses of Aegis from Leo include his set against Big D at Gomelex and against Shiny Mark at the pre-local of S Factor 11. Certainly two matchups that would be harder with Joker. But will things stay the way they are now? Will modern MkLeo be a Joker main with an Aegis pocket? Or will another character reappear like Roy or Rob? Only time will tell what face MkLeo wears for us next. But whichever one he chooses, one thing is for certain, we'll never see it coming. So dear viewers, I now turn to you. Which one of MkLeo's characters is your all-time favorite? Obviously there's the fan favorite Joker, but do you have another character that you just have a soft spot for? Me personally, I can't help but wonder about the timeline where Joker never released and Leo became the greatest Lucina main in Smash Bros. But what about you all? Let me know in the comments below. Also, now that you know every character Leo has played, which character do you think Leo should try out next that he hasn't played before? I think MkLeo should play Min Min. After all, they say the best way to learn a character's weaknesses is to pick them up for a few months. Either way, discuss it amongst yourselves and let me know if I missed any characters. I did a lot of research and have a lot of data, but like I covered up top, it isn't perfect. With all that said and done though, that's going to be it for today's video. Don't forget to watch my last video on Supernova if you haven't already. And until next time, dear viewers, I've been Mr. Mice, and thank you all so very much for watching.